Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something a lot of you were curious about.
Oh, yeah.
A recent court case in Kenya,
Mm-hmm.
all about a traditional drink called Muratina.
Interesting.
And we've got the court documents right here.
Wow, so we're going straight to the source.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it gets pretty fascinating because it's not just about a drink.
Right.
It's about culture.
And the law.
And what happens when they...
How to bump up against each other.
Yeah. So to set the scene, we're in Kiambu County, Kenya.
Okay.
Where this group of traditional brewers, they call themselves the Ndaya, traditional brewers.
Okay.
They took their case all the way to the high court.
Wow.
And their argument was that they had the right to brew Muratina.
Okay.
Because they're part of something called the Kikuyu Council of Elders.
I see.
Who are authorized to prepare this drink
Okay.
for their ceremonies.
Now, that's important because the Kikuyu people,
Right.
They're one of the largest ethnic groups in Kenya.
Exactly. So their traditions carry a lot of weight.
Yeah, for sure.
And these brewers, they were really insistent that Muratina is not something you sell.
Right.
It's purely for their traditional ceremonies.
Okay.
And has been a part of their culture literally for centuries.
Wow.
And they believe it's like essential to their ritual.
Deliberations.
All of that.
Yeah.
But then you have the police and government officials, and they're saying, hold on. We've got this thing called the Alcoholic Drinks Control Act.
That makes sense.
And it's there for a reason.
Yeah, public health.
Safety. All of that.
Standards.
Standards, exactly.
You know, it's interesting, though, because
What's that?
the police, they specifically mentioned the appeal process.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right from the start. It seems like they knew this case could go further.
Like they were expecting a fight.
Yeah, maybe they anticipated some pushback.
Interesting.
And perhaps were even ready for a longer legal battle.
Huh. And what's even more interesting is that in Kenya,
Yeah.
there's actually no specific law that bans Muratina.
Oh, wow.
This act they keep bringing up,
Right.
it regulates alcoholic beverages in general.
So it's not super clear-cut.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see both sides, right?
Definitely. On one hand, you have the brewers saying...
This is our heritage.
Exactly.
And on the other, you have the officials saying...
We have rules for a reason.
Exactly. But here's the thing that really surprised me.
What's that?
The court actually sided with the brewers.
Wow. I didn't expect that.
I know, right?
So they basically said tradition wins.
Well, it wasn't quite that simple.
I see.
But they did acknowledge the importance of Muratina
Right.
to the Kikuyu cult.
For their heritage.
But they also said, hey, we still need some kind of regulation here.
So it's like trying to balance these two things.
Yeah, finding that middle ground.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so fascinating.
Okay, so let's dive into what the court actually said.
Yes, let's get into the details.
What were their reasons for this decision? How did they manage to balance those two sides?
Well, to really understand that, we have to look closer at this thing called the Kiama,
Which is?
the traditional council of elders among the Kikuyu.
So that's who the brewers were saying they were authorized by.
Right.
What exactly does this council do?
Traditionally, they've always regulated the preparation
Okay.
and consumption of Muratina.
Within the Kikuyu community.
Exactly. They're like the guardians of this cultural practice.
So it's not just anyone who can just brew this drink.
Yeah.
There's a specific process.
There's knowledge involved,
Right.
and the court, they recognize that.
Interesting.
They specifically acknowledge the authority of the Kiama in managing this whole aspect of Kikuyu culture.
So for a modern court to basically say,
We respect your traditional authority.
that's a pretty big deal.
It is. But they still had to address the government's concerns about public safety.
Right. So how did they square that circle? Did they just ignore those concerns?
Not at all. The court recognized that even with traditional practices,
Yeah.
there needs to be some oversight. Oh, right.
They suggested this kind of collaborative approach.
Collaborative. What do you mean by that?
They proposed that the Kiama should continue regulating Muratina,
Okay.
but with the help of the local chiefs,
Or
representatives of the Kenyan government.
So it's almost like a partnership,
Yeah, you could say that.
blending tradition and modern governance.
Exactly. It's a really clever solution, I think.
Yeah, it's not a complete win for either side,
Right.
but it's a compromise.
It respects both the cultural importance of Muratina.
And the need for some level of regulation.
Exactly. It's not just a simple tradition versus modernity story.
More nuanced than that.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this case such a fascinating study.
In how legal systems
Right.
can adapt to these evolving contexts.
Exactly.
It's really interesting.
It is. And what's remarkable is that they went beyond just acknowledging their authority.
You mean the Kiyama?
Yeah. Okay.
They dug into the historical and cultural context to explain why they decided the way they did.
So they didn't just take their word for it.
Right, they did their homework.
And looked into the significance of Muratina.
To the Kikuyu people.
Okay, what did they find?
Well, they highlighted how it's been brewed for centuries.
I mean, we're talking way back.
Oh, yeah. A vital role in all sorts of Kikuyu traditions.
Like what specifically?
They listed specific ceremonies like dowry payments,
Oh, wow.
circumcision rituals,
Interesting.
gatherings of elders.
So it's deeply ingrained in their practices.
It is. It's not just a drink,
Right. It's a symbol of their heritage.
Their identity.
Makes you think about all the different traditions around the world.
Mm-hmm.
That might seem strange to people outside that culture,
Yeah, totally.
but they're full of meaning for the people who practice them.
That's it. The court basically said that Muratina is like a thread.
Woven into the fabric of their society.
Exactly. Trying to ban it outright would be like...
Erasing a part of their history.
Exactly.
I'm curious, did the court documents say anything about the actual brewing process?
They did.
Is there something special about how it's made?
They emphasize that it's not just a recipe. It involves this knowledge that's been passed down through generations.
Wow.
A deep understanding of the ingredients
Okay.
and respect for the tradition itself.
So there's a certain artistry to it.
That's a great way to put it. The court understood that it's more than just the drink itself.
Yeah.
It's an expression of their culture.
But even with all that, I keep coming back to the safety issue. The government's concerns were legitimate.
Of course.
Did the court just ignore those in favor of protecting the culture?
Not at all.
Okay.
They took those concerns seriously.
So how did they reconcile that?
Remember their solution.
The Kiyama, working with the local chiefs.
It was actually really smart in addressing that.
How so?
It creates a system of checks and balances.
Okay.
The Kiyama would still oversee the traditional stuff.
Making sure it's done according to their customs.
Right. But the local chiefs would also be involved.
So maybe inspecting brewing sites? Ensuring hygiene standards.
Making sure there's no harmful stuff being used.
So a blend of traditional knowledge and modern safety regulations.
Right. It's like they're saying, we trust you to uphold your traditions. We also need to ensure public safety.
It's a tough balance.
It is. But it's a more thoughtful solution than just banning Muratina.
Or completely ignoring the risks.
Exactly.
This case shows that legal systems don't always have to be adversarial.
That's right.
Sometimes the best outcomes come from finding common ground.
And working together.
This has been really eye-opening.
I know, right?
Who knew a simple drink could be so complex?
It's the beauty of these deep dives.
Sometimes the most ordinary things can be super insightful.
You said it.
So we've seen how the court ruled in favor of the brewers, while still saying, hey, we need some regulation.
Right.
But what does this mean for the future of Muratina in Kenya?
That's a great question.
Could this case set a precedent for other traditions?
Yeah, that might clash with modern laws.
What happens next?
That takes us to some even bigger questions about how societies
All around the world.
handle this intersection of tradition and law.
Yeah, it makes you think about like a whole legal landscape dealing with all these clashes.
Between tradition and like modern times.
Exactly. I mean, this Muratina thing is just one example.
Right.
There must be so many other traditions out there
Oh, I'm sure.
facing these same kinds of challenges.
Definitely.
Like what about traditional medicine?
Oh, yeah.
The use of certain plants and stuff.
Right. Because some plants.
That might be essential to some indigenous group.
Right. But they could be seen as.
Illegal in other places.
Exactly.
It's tricky.
It is. It really highlights how legal systems, they need to be flexible.
Adaptable.
Yeah, to understand all these different cultural practices.
And find a way to fit them in.
To the law.
Right.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is. On one hand,
Yeah.
you don't want to just crush these traditions.
That have been around for so long.
Centuries. But then again, yeah, you can't ignore the risks either.
Right.
What if something is actually harmful?
Exactly.
It's tough.
That's why it's so important
What's that?
to have this dialogue,
Okay.
to collaborate.
Instead of just battling it out.
Right, like tradition versus modern.
Yeah.
What if we try to bridge that gap?
Find solutions that work for everyone.
Right.
Like the court did in this Muratina case.
Yeah. They didn't just shut it down.
They really listened,
Dita Brewer.
understood what this drink meant,
And then they found a way
to incorporate those traditions.
with modern safety concerns.
Exactly. It's a great example.
It sets a precedent
For finding common ground.
showing that respecting culture doesn't have to mean
Ignoring public well-being.
right. That's a powerful message.
It really is. So for anyone listening, this case in Kenya,
Yeah, with a drink at its center.
it shows that tradition and modern society
They can coexist.
maybe even learn from each other.
That's a good point.
It's a reminder that cultures change.
They do.
And laws need to reflect that.
Absolutely.
We've looked at the court's decision, but the big question remains.
Yeah.
How do we handle these situations?
Where culture and regulations clash.
In a way that respects both sides.
That's the challenge.
It's a question that's going to keep coming up.
As our world gets more and more connected.
Exactly. And that's it for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.